America's Voice Live on a Monday. So glad you're starting your week off right here. I do truly appreciate it, as everybody does in the team. Now, the Biden economy, you might have noticed, not doing very well. And that's an understatement. But the Democrats, as well as the president himself, want you to believe that Republicans will make it worse. Most Americans don't agree. As a recent Trafalgar poll asked, do you think the Democrats retain control of Congress after the 2022 midterm elections would improve or hurt the American economy? Well, 59% of respondents said that Democrats retaining power would hurt the economy. 41% said the Democrats would improve the economy. So any hope for the economy in the short term, well, not too great. With me to discuss it is the president of Walser Wealth Management, Rebecca Walser. Rebecca, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
You know, it doesn't matter where you look. I can look at gas prices and diesel. That's pretty easy. We have a shortage of diesel right now. We have a 25-day supply in America, the lowest it's been, I think, in 14 years. That is concerning. We still have a rail strike that's hanging out there because one of the unions rejected that contract deal. And after the midterms are over, that rail strike could become real. We've got other issues, mostly stemming from bad energy policy, none of which this administration seems to have any interest in correcting, right or wrong.
100% right. And I don't have to tell you, Steve, but the audience might not realize that this is obviously a concerted effort across multiple fronts to push towards the transition. Multiple administration members have gone to the press in the last 10 days and talked about not doing anything to slow down the gas prices because that would slow the quote, quote, transition, as if this is something that the American people know what they're talking about and that the American people are accepting and are on board with. Of course, what they're talking about is the transition from what they call fossil fuels to green energy policies at whatever the cost to our gas and our diesel and whatever the cost to heat our homes this week.
Yeah. Can we talk about the fallacy, Rebecca, of this idea that the unemployment number is low and that's a great thing? Can we dispense of that fallacy? Because that was true in 2019 and going into 2020 when you had, was it 7 or 8 million more people in the workforce than you do today? Millions of people left the workforce. They're not there anymore. So to say that the unemployment level is low, it's not a fair comparison. It's actually fairly irrelevant. And you have staffing issues all over this country. So to say that unemployment's low, so therefore things are great, it's dishonest, isn't it?
Very dishonest. We just had a report that came out last week that said over 7 million able-bodied men between the ages of 25 and 64 have left the workforce in the last 18 months simply from disgust of not being able to find whatever the position was before that kept them in the workforce. So our workforce is changing. We have a lot of people that are no longer participating in the labor participation rate, but we have a lot of people that have left the search. And so, it's really disingenuous to say that, the number's so small, because that number being so small is definitely reflective of the fact that a lot of people have just up and said, forget it. I'll just retire. I'll just stay on this kind of aid. I'll just get by. I'll move into a tiny house. I'll move in with relatives. We've had a lot of movements and a lot of relocations around this country, all affected and tied to employment. And obviously the urban cities are getting more and more blighted. Just look at the exodus out of Chicago from corporations and businesses that we've had in the last 6 months alone. And you can see the trend of what's happening as these kinds of urban areas they're moving to the South and to areas that are a lot more open from policy perspective and tax perspective.
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of other things that are impacting the economy that really do have an impact on people. As the interest rates keep being pushed up by the Fed, it means the interest rate on credit card debt, which has exploded, by the way, in the last few months, again, because people, also they're hit with inflation, they've got to get groceries on the table, they've got to get gas in the car. So there it is, credit card debt ballooning in America. Well, the interest rates on that credit card debt is also going to be ballooning as they add another 0.75 of a point, maybe a full percentage point, 100 basis points potentially to the interest rate. If you have an adjustable rate mortgage, this is going to be painful. If you have anything that's adjustable rate, it's going to be painful. But if you need a used car or a new car, these are all places where the Americans are going to get punched. Plus, the Fed has openly said they want to create unemployment, more of it. I mean, how joyous for them going into Christmas. Let's make unemployment higher just in time for Christmas. I mean, honestly, Rebecca, this is their plan?
Well, it's how obviously, obviously he's tasked with keeping unemployment at a certain level, but he knows that the movements that he's making is increasing the cost of capital. And that's the bottom line. As you raise interest rates, the cost of capital goes up. And what do? They pull back on investment, and that includes employment and job opportunities and job openings. So I think that it's a natural recourse and response when the Fed does and is continuing to be aggressive. We start to see now the prospects. We're at about a 75% plus prospect for a 75 basis point hike next week. That's back down to just about 53% now. And that's because we've had two Fed presidents, both Chicago and San Francisco, come out last week and state that, they're worried about us going too hot, too fast. And exactly what you're talking about, having a backlash in the employment sectors and companies have already announced either they're freezing jobs or they are not hiring, they're going to lay off. So the Fed knows that this pain is coming. It just hasn't been seen yet, but it is coming. So they're being preemptive now about their comments, and that leaves market watchers and CME to say, well, maybe we won't get a 75 basis points here. But at the same time, the Fed cannot pivot, Steve. The Fed cannot pivot. The reason the dollar is the strongest in the world is because the Fed has taken these actions after we basically printed or enlarged our budget by $10 trillion during coronavirus. So when you have that much stimulus that fast, without this kind of fast tightening, which is very painful, which is why Powell said those words, you're going to have a currency collapse, and they're trying to avoid that. I think that's pretty much inevitable at this point based on what's going on in the UK.
When you say currency collapse, I want you to focus on that for a moment, Rebecca. When you talk about the dollar being very strong and the dollar becomes then very weak, what happens to this country? What happens to the consumers? What happens to the average American? Their earnings, their spending, their costs. Give me the last word on that.
The dollar collapse would be a disaster for America. We have been the world reserve currency since 1944 Bretton Woods, Hampshire. We certainly have strengthened that in 1974 with the petrodollar arrangement with Saudi Arabia. But since Russia invaded Ukraine and got kicked out of SWIFT, the BRICS nations are moving a real effort. And if you just look at the institutional gold buys by the BRICS nations just since April, it is some of the largest institutional gold buys we've ever seen. So as we see this play out, the dollar is going to have a run for its game for the first time since 1944. And that means that we cannot carte blanche write whatever check we want and spend and create money out of thin air like we've always had since 1944. And that will hit Americans in the pocketbook. So we have to be really cautious. This is a very dangerous time. And I think it's going to get difficult. And so Americans should really prepare. Make sure you have some cash at home. Make sure you have some supplies because it's going to get rocky here before the end of the year, for sure.
Sounds like the cash won't be worth much, but gold, if the dollar becomes very weak, then the value of gold per ounce will explode, won't it?
The gold is extremely underpriced. It is extremely price manipulated. I mean, you can see this. There was a CNBC article. JP Morgan has been convicted even this year. More convictions, more fines. Definitely COMEX and the London exchange can definitely manipulate the price of metals. And they've been doing this. It's very well documented. And that's why Russia is basically moving to bring forward their own Moscow standard for gold. And that will upset the metals markets. And you will see the price of gold and silver and all of the other metals that have been tapped down, as they've had to keep them tapped down. Because if gold would have really been valuated at its true value based versus the US dollar, you would have seen a dollar collapse a long time ago. So they've had to do this. And now we're at the end of it because debt currencies, fiat currencies, this is the death knell. 2022 it's ending for all of them. So US will not be alone in that.
Rebecca Walser, thank you for being here. Good conversation. Thank you for your time.